What is up, everybody? I hope you are enjoying this episode of my man Adam Shell, and I wanted to take a second while I have your ear to let you know that next Thursday, October 17th from 7 to 9:30 p.m. EST, Breathe with Cannabis is back, and this month's theme is amazing. This month's theme is the Relationship Healing Edition. So whether or not you're having challenges in how you relate to yourself, your romantic partner, friendships, cannabis, anything in life, this workshop is going to be an amazing opportunity to come allow yourself to usher in your next level of evolution when it comes to your relationships, alongside our worldwide community of spiritual seekers just like you. So to find out more about the event and register, head down to the show notes for this episode, and I will see you all there. Now back to the show. Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. In the current psychedelic renaissance, many people who otherwise had never been interested in psychedelic medicines are now finding interest in working with them. Whether it's through the mainstream, the self-development or spiritual industries, or otherwise, it's clear that with this many people with little to no prior experience now entering this realm, that the necessity for proper training and education are more important than ever. This being said, we're also seeing a lot of individuals with little to no training now positioning themselves as guides, shamans, etc. And while I'd like to believe they all have the best of intentions at heart, this is something that we all must be cautious around, as the truth is that without the proper guidance, these medicines can do more harm than good within the human experience. Today's guest on the show is a dear friend and a client of mine who has extensive education in the realms of psychedelic therapy, integrated family systems, or parts work as it is commonly referred to, various therapeutic modalities such as sound healing, and much, much more. And in this episode, I brought her on to discuss her own background in these medicines, some of the most powerful modalities and offerings she currently brings her clients through, what some of the results she supports her clients in receiving look like, and what to look for when finding a psychedelic guide for yourself. This episode is near and dear to my heart, as it is so important that we are able to understand how to use discernment in who we work with. And our intention with today's episode is that you can each walk away with confidence in your ability to navigate the psychedelic space moving forward. So please, help me in welcoming my amazing friend Shelley DeMarco to the show. Shelley DeMarco, my dear friend, I am super excited that you are here with me today. You know, as I said in the intro to all you guys tuning in, Shelley and I met each other a few years back now, probably a couple of years anyway. And you went through Connect with Cannabis. And right off the bat, I realized like you are an absolute unit. You know, I get a lot of people in the programs that are newer to this kind of work, you know, and it's not every day I get someone with so much experience, and we become dear friends and, you know, work together in other ways as well. So I'm so excited to have you here. How's your day going before we dive into all the juiciness we're going to dive into?
Oh gosh, it's a beautiful day here, and so excited. You know, I live part-time in Phoenix, and so it has been record temperatures and we're finally cooling off. So it's been great.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, we're getting a very rare 75-degree day at almost the end of October. So it was kind of weird walking around without a shirt on today. I'm like, I usually don't get to do this past September. So I was like, I'm taking full advantage of that today. So I'm glad to hear that you're getting to have one of those nice cool off periods. You know, up here it's warming up. Down there it's cooling off that you look forward to.
Yeah. As long as it's good, right? We can enjoy it.
Yeah, 100%. And so, you know, Shelley, where I love to start these episodes off for context for everyone listening is, you know, for you, your background, I mean, you were a, you know, representative at Beachbody for so long, which we connected on because I did P90X for years. And then, of course, you made your transition into psychedelic therapy and being a psychedelic therapist and everything you're doing now. So how did you first get interested in the idea of psychedelics? You know, was that something you were always open to? Did you experiment back in the day? Or was this something that kind of birthed out of you later on in life?
Yeah, it's so funny. That's such an interesting loaded question, right? Like 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have told you the story, right? And
Yeah.
it's so interesting how the climate has changed that, now it's actually a cool thing that I did LSD in high school and, experimented with some of the different modalities that were available. But back then, it was really more of like connection time with your friends or just having a good time. There was no knowledge at that time in my circles anyway of using these compounds for growth and for spiritual development and all the things that we're learning and doing now.
Mm.
So back in the day, it was just one of my favorite things to connect with friends and have a good time. But then I grew up, got the job, had 4 children, was just kind of living my life in just getting by, doing okay, but I'd had some serious losses in my life, and I was my father had taken his own life in 2007, and it was like I had just had my youngest child, and I had no time to mourn. I had no time to even think because I just had to get up and go to work every day. And I remember, just kind of life was just like that for a while. I just would, do my best, of course, getting into health coaching and exercise and the P90Xs and all that. That was really good and it helped. But I remember one day I was listening to, I think, the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I heard James Fadiman talking about microdosing. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, and I had never thought that these were compounds that could be used for healing and for help with depression and anxiety and, just so many things, PTSD. And so immediately I was like perked up and thought about it for myself. And so I started doing research and I got my own coach and I started using just microdosing was okay.
Mm.
Right. Microdosing, like, I'm not really doing drugs. I'm just microdosing, and so that seemed very plausible to me. And I did notice that my life was starting to turn around in really interesting ways. Like I had been a solid, wine drinker, like solid. Every night, 5 o'clock, the bottle was open. That was what you did, Italian household. We were cooking. It was what you were supposed to do. Right. And so, but I didn't notice how much wine was creeping into my life, how much alcohol in general, and just kind of the behavior that would come from that, just the sadness and the rumination that would come after that. And I realized after, a few weeks of microdosing that I had gone a whole week without even thinking about drinking. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about, you know what I mean? It was like, I didn't even realize I hadn't been drinking. And so that was when I really started to see, oh, this is powerful. This is powerful medicine. And so then I dove deeper, started searching for myself for a macro journey. And then once I went to Mexico and I had a beautiful experience with an indigenous family, I was like, this is it. This is what, I can use to help me heal. And then I started realizing, oh, all these clients that I'm helping in their health journey, that this was also part of that. And so I started learning facilitation, got into sound healing, breath work, all the different things that kind of accentuate the medicine and help with the path of integration. And now I've been, doing this full time with hundreds and hundreds of people. And so it's just been a miracle in my life to be able to serve and help people.
Wow. It's so amazing to hear your story. And again, I've already heard your story before, but it's amazing to kind of like go over it once again and really like dive into it because, I imagine for everyone listening, you can hear a lot of elements in your own journey that are similar, right? Like maybe you took a certain path in life, like you and I both did, right? All right, I guess we got to get with the times and grow up and become an adult and all these things and get the corporate job just to realize that we weren't really happy there. But when we looked around, everyone was kind of just seemingly happy. Again, you don't really notice it until you notice how much people drink or how much they're abusing XYZ thing, bad food, pornography, cannabis, drugs, whatever it is. But again, I think that a lot of people are going through that like slow death of sorts, where they're not sick necessarily, but they're just kind of kicking the can along. They're not really thriving in life. They're merely surviving. And the amount of courage it takes to actually admit to yourself that you are just merely surviving and that there's another level coming for you. You may not know what that level is yet, and it doesn't really matter. But to have the courage and the faith and the tenacity to actually go forward into that, it takes a lot of courage, and part of the reason I do this show is to show everyone, like, if we can do it, so can you, like we didn't have any certain skill set beforehand that made us able to see these things. It's just that when the fear of staying the same outweighs the fear of change, that's when change can happen. And in a really big way, we can actually thank those things, like in your life, right? That alcohol consumption, the job you were working at you didn't love, even your father, taking his own life, right? Those are obviously things that are very challenging to experience in one's life. But looking back in hindsight, we can see how those things were triggers for you. And they could have easily been triggers to fall deeper into the hole, but you allowed those triggers to actually allow you to rise out of that. And I think that's such a good hero's journey, because our mess really does come from our mission, or our mission comes from our mess, rather, and that's exactly what happened to me as well. I was addicted to cannabis. My dad had passed away from cancer and all these things. And that's where all my mission showed up. And that's one of the main things that I know, we talk about all the time with different people and whatnot in the groups and everything like that, is like, how can you take this metaphorical mess that you feel you're in right now and turn it into a mission in disguise? And so it's really cool that you were able to do that, and it's really inspiring as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that term, mission from the mess. I'll give you credit, but I'm going to borrow that.
Yeah, that could be a great group program right there,
Exactly. My next class is called Mission.
Yeah, from mess to mission, That's actually a really good workshop idea. One of us will steal that for sure.
We'll do it together.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do it together. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I know. And the other thing was, I feel weird, like just jumping the gate and saying that my dad took his own life, but it was so pivotal in the work I do, because one of the things that happened during that time was I had a really good friend that was a pharmacist, and my dad had been, having kind of a really bad year. He was declining. I knew he was drinking too much. I knew he was feeling down, and he had ended up in the hospital for allegedly a stroke. And in retrospect, it looks like he was originally trying to take his life then. But I remember talking to my friend and saying, yeah, the doctors put him on this antidepressant. It was a very well-known antidepressant. And, to try to help him. And she said, yeah, that's good. She says, only thing is that if they're at all suicidal, it will help them execute. And I remember saying, oh, well, no way. Like, no way. My dad would never do that. Like, no, he's not that kind of person. And 2 weeks later, he was dead. And so for me, if there's a way to help just one person get better and find a way out of their depression or anxiety or despair, then I feel like my father's death isn't in vain then, because these are important medicines to help people heal. And so I really feel driven from that experience that, if I had just known then what I know now, like maybe he'd still be here,
Yeah, 100%. I totally understand, my father going through cancer and everything he was dealing with as well, because cancer was kind of just the result of everything he was dealing with. He was dealing with a lot of depression and things of that nature. His business had failed and he really felt like a failure. He put a lot of his self-worth into his business and into his external life. And so when that started failing and he couldn't really find a way out, he didn't really see a purpose for himself anymore. And so when he started getting lung pain and things like that, I kept asking him, are you going to the doctor? And he's like, oh, no, it's totally fine. And he'd go and he'd meet some quack and they'd be like, no, I think you're fine. Maybe you have pleurisy. He's like, okay. And just goes home. Nope, just pleurisy. But, it's really interesting because any day I have a challenging day or I feel depressed or I feel anything, all I have to do is just think about my dad. And it's like a perfect ignition switch every single time to remind myself, like, that is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And whatever I'm feeling right now, if that's the price to pay for being able to continue going on my mission, that is a price I'll pay every time, because it's just the same way as if I go to the gym and maybe I'm tired that day and, every voice in my head is saying, don't do that. I don't want to go to the gym. But if you listen to that voice long enough, you'll end up overweight, diseased, unhealthy, whatever, right? In the gym analogy anyway. And so, I think those voices come up a lot. And I think that, having things that can allow us to quote unquote beat that inner critic is so valuable in our life. And when we think about, my dad, your dad, et cetera, we could say that maybe they came to a point in their life where they didn't have that deep enough why that would allow them to dig themselves out of that hole. And that's why for me, like I'm so bullish, to use a crypto term on, helping people find their why and connecting with people who have found their why like yourself, and, to talk about these medicines for a second and their utility, it's pretty funny how the world today is getting a very clinical type approach to psilocybin, MDMA, et cetera. But like you were saying, even when I first got into these medicines back in, what was that, 2015, 2014, right around there, cannabis I got into obviously before that, but any other medicine, I had never, tried or gotten into. I'd heard a lot about them. I was curious about them, but I was too scared to try them. But when I first tried MDMA, even back then, it was only, 10 years ago, but it really wasn't getting the accolades it was today. It was kind of like, oh, you're doing ecstasy, you're going to a rave, like there's not really any like utility here other than you're going to feel awesome for a few hours. And these days, it's pretty funny how they're clinicalizing a lot of it. And I'm not fully against that. I think it will make them available to certain people who maybe are older and wouldn't trust someone like a me, for instance, coming up to them and saying, hey, you should, maybe look into psychedelics, see if that, resonates. They might look at me and be like, I just don't vibe with your vibe. But if they see a guy or girl in a white lab coat as a doctor who's telling them like, yeah, these actually have utility, maybe that helps them. So I'm not against it fully. But what we also know is that these medicines, not maybe MDMA and LSD and the synthetics, but, ayahuasca, mushrooms, San Pedro, these have been done traditionally in the jungle or in nature or in a maloca or something of that nature for thousands upon thousands of years. And I think that there is a potential challenge. Like I can't imagine doing a mushroom dose in a hospital setting. Like that feels like I might as well just do acid and go to a funeral. You know what I mean? That's like the most depressing place to do it. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, if it gets some people to, try them out that otherwise wouldn't, all the better. But I'm curious for you, like, as you've gotten into this journey for yourself and you've kind of seen the mainstream hit psychedelics and everything, what are your thoughts on, kind of where the mainstream is taking psychedelics these days? Are you, let's say, in support of it? Are you partially in support of it? What would you like to see happen that maybe is not happening? What are your thoughts that come to heart or mind when I ask that?
What is up, family? I wanted to take a second while you're tuning in to tell you about an amazing new product I recently began using. Now, you guys know I do ads very rarely, and my promise to you is that anything I speak about is something I personally have found value in using regularly. Well, recently, I came across a company called Brain Supreme, who sells microdoses of mushrooms mixed with adaptogens, nootropics, and other additions as well. And even though I've microdosed off and on for years, I have never felt results like these. In only 2 weeks, I'm sleeping better, I have far less mind chatter, my ability to perform has exponentially improved, and best of all, the sense of inner peace I've been feeling is like nothing I've ever experienced in microdosing before. Right now, you can get 15% off of any of their products when you use code SPRAGUE15 at checkout. And to find out more about them and grab some for yourself, head down to the show notes for this episode and begin your journey into microdosing today. Now back to the show.
Listen, I'm a fan of people ending their suffering. And whatever that has to look like, I'm all for it. That being said, I do get a lot of people that have tried clinical settings and they're helped by them. It's not like they're not helpful, right? It's just that, but then they come and they do like medicine in ceremony. And the feeling is just totally different. When you're having the live singing and the drumming and the rattles and the people, the guardians holding space, it has a different feel than if you're like sitting in a dentist chair somewhere with a drip. It's just, it just feels differently. And so, whereas that might be a great start, like if you somebody that I've had so many people that are like, well, that seems like doing drugs, whereas if I'm in a medical office, I feel safe. And then, a lot of people start with ketamine, right? And that helps them. It interrupts the patterns. It's great for just kind of that first level. And for some people that's enough, right? And they're good. But if someone has a lot of PTSD, a deep depression, there can be magic in the ceremony. I really and truly believe in that. So I think there's a place for all of it. but I also really, truly believe in the power of just being deep in ceremony with people that are caring about you.
Yeah. I'm like 95%, 5%, 95% on exactly what you just said, 5% on the other side, just because I feel like at least if only one person has been helped clinically, it's worth it to have it there.
Right.
But I 100% agree. Like the times, and again, like, even the times I've just been with friends, right? The right group of people, the right setting, those things, like, it's pretty funny. Nature is extremely intelligent, right? So we think about everything that goes into a clinical setting. First of all, you have to have someone there trained or that has certain accolades to be able to hold the container. We'll use ceremonial terms for it, but, essentially watch out for them. You have to then get the medicine. You have to then usually have, really expensive machines and all these things, right? It's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
Versus the fact that, for anyone who's taken a 5-gram mushroom dose and laid in the grass or taken a couple tabs of acid and gone on an adventure in the woods, you realize that nature is incredibly intelligent and it has everything you need baked into it to experience these medicines in a powerful way. And why wouldn't it be that way, right? Like, I think it's naive to think that we can try to outsmart nature or make it better. I think that the only argument I have for clinical setting is just the fact of what we already talked about. Maybe some people are still deep in programming around like, well, if it's just on the street and I do it with my friends, it's drugs. But if I do it here, it's a medicine, right? And that's something that a lot of people are still going through, and I think, as, my generation after me gets older, I think we'll start to see less and less of, people that have that certain type of programming around quote unquote drugs, because technically everything is a drug. McDonald's talk about drugs that are bad and not even fun, it's really funny. I had a guy that I was talking to down in Austin when we did Breathe with Cannabis Live down there, and we were talking about food. And, we were all eating some healthy food, and we were talking about how it's just easy at this point to eat healthy food. And he was like, yeah, it's pretty funny. Anyone who's addicted to food just hasn't done enough drugs, and it was a joke, obviously, but, it is funny. It's like, if you're going to, want to have fun, there are much better ways than, getting your drugs through food and, through vaccines and God knows what else. Right. But, I'm curious for you, a lot of the questions I get from listeners on the show are, which medicine should I take, right? Like, what's the best medicine for XYZ type scenario? And knowing is how you have experience, with a few different medicines. I mean, quite a few, actually. Why don't we start with, let's say, psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine? I think those are probably the top 3 that, most people are aware of. We're going to get into 5-MeO after that because I know you have a lot of experience with that. But from psilocybin to MDMA to ketamine, in your experience, and you can gladly talk about clients if you'd like to, but in your experience, where does each of those medicines really come in handy for your own evolution, and where have you maybe seen it help your clients? Like, what would be a situation in which you'd go, oh, right now, I think this would really be a good psilocybin experience versus an MDMA experience versus a ketamine experience?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think for me, what I generally see is people, that are learning about psychedelics will seek out ketamine because it's available, it's legal, it's something, again, in a clinical setting that people can kind of just bridge that gap first. So what happens is a lot of people come to me after ketamine. So they've had kind of that first layer, not everybody, but I have a good portion of people that, their anxiety is so deep, they just need relief. They need something. And so they'll seek something out and they'll be like, oh, well, ketamine, I can go to this. I don't have to, figure out who's underground, who's, above ground, who's whatever.
Go to a jungle.
they can just get help. And so that's a great first course. And I know a lot of people keep revisiting. They have a relationship with ketamine, and that's wonderful. For a lot of other people, they're more of the, I want to stick with nature. It feels better to me if it's natural, if it's not a synthetic. I feel like I'm communing with something greater than myself. And so psilocybin is my number one first round option because it is such a beautiful experience. You can go a little lighter, you can go deeper. If someone's first time, low and slow, right? We don't want to blast someone off to the universe. We just kind of want them to ease into a relationship with the medicine and feel into what it feels like to take time for themselves, to be in nature, right? Where we do our ceremonies, it's deep in nature, and we're encouraging people to just quiet. They're not surrounded by screens. They're not with their phones. They're in a quiet, beautiful space with singing, with, all the sound healing instruments. And there's so much healing that comes just from that, with the breathing, just connecting with the breath, which you do so beautifully. It's these are the powerful things that are so simple, right? We overthink, like we don't have to do all the things. We don't necessarily have to go to the jungle, right, to get deep healing. We can start with these wonderful medicines that have always been there and are readily available for us. We can grow our own at any point. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love that. And that's like, my go-to, obviously cannabis and I are biffles, we're like this for everyone who's listening. I'm crossing my fingers, but basically like, other than cannabis, psilocybin is my next, ally that always works out for me. And I don't mean to say always works out to be read as always positive, always easy, always fun. That medicine will check me so hard. Cannabis is almost like a fun coach for me that can show me things, but it does it with a soft hand, and sometimes it can be a little bit more heavy of a hand, say if I get in an argument with Rachel and I think I'm totally right, and then I connect with cannabis and I'm like, shit, again, it just showed me like, look over here. You still think you're right? And again, it might do it with a light hand, but it might be hard for me to actually have the courage to be like, okay, yep, I was wrong there. I didn't see the full picture of what was going on. But with psilocybin, on the other hand, what's great about it, as opposed to like LSD, for instance, because those two are compared a lot. They're not really similar at all, but they are compared a lot. The thing with acid is you don't really know what you're going to get. Like you're going to have a little white tab of paper or a vial of liquid, and good luck. Like it could be one dose, it could be 10. You really have no idea, And again, like if you have a trusted source, you should be able to kind of depend on it. But with LSD, I mean, I've had probably, no joke, and I'm part Virgo, so like, I'm very structured, and I always make sure I'm testing what I get and everything. But I probably had 10 experiences with LSD where I thought it was one dose, it was over at least 5 doses, and it just, became an ordeal, and I got through it, right? Maybe with little bruises, but I got through it. But with psilocybin, it's really cool because, except for strains like PE and strains of that nature, if you eat 0.5, it's not going to feel like you ate 5 grams, so it's pretty dependable over time, especially if you're working with strains like Golden Teachers or B plus or any of those types of varieties. So it's really cool in that way. And, for me, about once a year, I know I need a cleanse of sorts, right? I can just feel like I'm getting muddy. I keep my life going very fast, and that's by design. Like I fucking love what I do. So like, I'll rip 3 podcasts in a day. I'll work weekends. Like, I'll do these things because it doesn't feel like work to me. But also I know doing that does speed me up quite a bit, and we live in a very fast world too. So sometimes I just get this intuitive hit of like, I feel like I'm forgetting some things right now, but I can't really put my finger on what I'm forgetting because I'm on the hamster wheel, And so every once in a while, usually around February every year, we usually do it for Valentine's Day, Rach and I, we'll do a 10-gram mushroom tea. And I'll just remember, I'll completely slow down. Because for anyone who hasn't done that before, for me anyway, what 5 grams does is it makes you a wiggly worm for a while on the bed, just like, oh my God, this feels so crazy. And then eventually you just get to this still point, which is like looking at a crystal still pond. And you just exist there for like 3 hours. And from that place, I can then make a plan of like, okay, do I still like where I'm going? Do I like, the speed I'm going at? Do I need to make any adjustments here? Are the things that I'm connecting with, say, coffee or anything like that, is that in balance right now? And that then sets up the stage for the next year's goals, of how I usually do it. So I've really found psilocybin to be amazing in that way. I'm curious, like for your own personal, journey and, medicine use and whatnot, do you find psilocybin works in a similar way for you? It's kind of like a reset button in a way.
Yeah, my husband and I have a routine of we journey on our anniversaries. So like our dating anniversary is in April, our wedding anniversary is September. And then we always journey on New Year's. So we kind of have our own cadence of time. We know we're going to unplug and we're going to do our own thing. And it's so funny you mentioned this. You mentioned like having a fight with Rachel, because the last time we journeyed, it was right before our anniversary. And I was just like, I had a part that was building resentment. And it was just kind of like, I can't wait to have this journey because he's going to be so sorry once he sees what he's been doing. He's going to say sorry to me, and he's going to do all this stuff. And we drop in, and I'm like, just kind of cruising along, expecting the bliss, expecting, all the good vibes. And all of a sudden the teacher came in and was like, "Oh, honey, it's not him." It's you. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I just was, seeing my part in all of the miscommunication and that, just kind of missing each other because things had gotten sped up too fast, and so taking that time to slow down and allowing the lessons to come is so, where would we be without that? I would still be in my little talk with myself about how right I am, and it's so beautiful to be humble. It's so beautiful to really see, my part in things and to be able to then change. So, I definitely love, at least twice a year, we do the combo of psilocybin with MDMA, which I just love with a partner. If you have a partner,
it's the best.
It's the best, right? And so that is really lovely. And then for New Year's, we usually do an LSD journey because it's cerebral and we're planning for the year. So we're more, in my experience, I feel like I can think a little more just create and problem solve. And even if I can't, my last experience was more of a lesson as well, but it kind of opened the door. So afterwards I was on fire, idea, and so it definitely helps me be a better provider. It helps me be just more heart-centered with my family, with my kids, and so with the people that I get to work with, people like you, it's how I show up in the world really matters to me. So taking that time is crucial.
Yeah, 100%, and
yeah.
it's just interesting because like you said, we just don't know what we forget as we forget it. Because the way I kind of look at it, I was putting this together as you were wrapping up there in my head. It was kind of popping through as an idea. But if you look at whatever you want to call it, the world that we live in, whether or not you believe it's the way it should be, or not, whatever, we live in a very unnatural type setting based on what human beings have been living in for potentially hundreds of thousands of years, depending on what, history and what science you kind of look at in terms of human origins. But, again, it hasn't been that long, probably about 100 years or so, not even, that we've been existing in this workforce, having to go to a place, right? Maybe the Industrial Revolution, is probably when that started, right around then. So right around 100 years now. Yeah. But, this kind of idea of having to go is not the way that things have always been. And I think a lot of us deep down, I knew as a kid, that wasn't how I wanted to live my life. But what are you supposed to do as one person entering an entire fucking world of people that are convinced that's the way the world's supposed to be? True. What ends up happening, or at least to me anyways, you just kind of fall into it in your own way. And I'd always try to find ways to get out of it a little bit, find side hustles and things that I could get some more of my time back. But I think for a lot of us that find psychedelics, it's almost like, when a plane lands, right, it doesn't just slow down right away. There's levels to it, right? Where you'll get the immediate hit down, and then it will have another level of slow, and then another level of slow, right? And you might not even notice it. When you land and you feel the brakes go on, you might think, oh, that amount of brakes is going to slow us down all the way. And so you don't know there's another level to slow down. Then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, there's another level. Whoa, there's another level, right? Yeah. And so I feel like a lot of us are going through that right now where, for me, my goal is to not have to be going my entire life. Luckily, I'm very fortunate. I love what I do. So the go really doesn't matter that much. It is fun for me. It's a good dopamine hit. But at the same time, I am also continually working at integrating a slower lifestyle into my frame of being. And last year, my mushroom trip that I did last year really just set it in stone for me. It was I don't like the life that I'm creating right now in terms of business and whatever. And I realized another level of that pattern in me that wasn't even really mine. It's ancestral or whatever, that believed that, work had to be hard. I had to go fast and furious. It had to be warrior mode constantly. And that wasn't something that, again, anyone told me or whatever. It was something that I believed. So naturally, when I was looking at business mentors and people like that, I would seek out people who would be like, yeah, you gotta get on a lot of podcasts. You got to make content constantly and all these things, because that met me where I was at. But once I saw behind that veil, I was like, okay, no more. I'm going to start a new pattern. And now I'm about 10 months into it, coming up on 11. It was last December that I had this kind of idea, and my life looks a lot different. And I know there's a whole nother level waiting, and that being said, there's always more levels, the more you dig, the more you'll find, but at the end of the day, I think that having those times, those rituals throughout the year, just like we've had for potentially hundreds of thousands of years as human beings, right? We have these certain rituals every year. And I think a lot of us have lost that ritual aspect of life. I think that's why a lot of us humans are also seeking out things that can make up for the lack of rituals that we're feeling in our day-to-day life. It's like, yeah, we might have Christmas and whatever, but it's like you got to go buy a bunch of gifts and hang out with people you don't even really like. Like, it's not really rituals that make you feel like you're getting to pour from an overflowing cup. Do you feel that way too? I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure. As a matter of fact, I just got back from ayahuasca, and so it's like one of those things that really gets shown to you, I think, in those deeper levels of medicine where you can really linger. And what was so unique about my last experience was this particular indigenous group incorporate singing and dancing in the ceremony, which was like beyond comprehension to me. Like, how on earth can you possibly get up when you're deep in this medicine? Like, it just seemed unfathomable. And it was a sitting ceremony as well. So like, in my world, you're masked up, you're on a mat, you're down for the count, it's like you're internal. And this was all just blended. It's internal, it's external, it's a celebration, it's a sorrow. And even that was such an eye opener for me to realize that, really, that's also what we did was we celebrated together. We suffered together. No one was on an island suffering alone. Right. And to me, I had this like epiphany of like how beautiful that is. Like, it's not great to hear tons of people throwing up at one time, but when you're in this together, you're like, we're all going through this. Like, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person here that has problems, and that person's problems sound a lot worse. You know what I mean? It's like I'm doing okay. And then just being walked home with the music and the drums. And it was one of those moments that really brought home how beautiful it is to be in a group setting in medicine, because it can be just as profound. It has its place as a quiet journey does too, And so I feel like all of these lessons are exactly what we need when we need them. When we're going too hard, the medicine comes in and goes, hey, slow down. It's okay. And when we're not pulling our weight, it also does the same thing. Like, maybe you should step it up, And so it's all exactly what we need at the time. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I found too. It's almost like, the Motel 6 slogan, we'll leave the light on for you. That's kind of like, it's exactly what you need when you need it. Right. And, like that's what I've always found with any different type of medicine that I've tried. The only exception where it's not that I didn't get what I needed necessarily, but it was just so big of an experience that I came out of it being like, how do I make sense of that? Which was 5-MeO DMT. And I know that you work with 5 quite often. So, I also get hit up by a lot of people who listen to the show that are curious about DMT. And, I always relate to them like, hey, just be aware, it's a lot stronger than if you're used to mushrooms or something like that. The thing with me that, doesn't freak me out, I would say, but kind of gives me a little bit of uneasiness about 5. And NN is a little bit different. I mean, I've done that a couple of times on my own, but I've only had a true, like, full on melt, like, you turn into a puddle of goo type experience from 5-MeO. Yeah. So basically, the quickness of that experience is the part that gets me every time. Because usually with mushrooms or whatever, even if you eat a lot of them, there's like levels. Like, you'll start feeling it, then you kind of stabilize, and you feel another level, and you stabilize. It's kind of like a slow ladder. Whereas 5-MeO is like the fastest rocket ship you could ever go on. You start hitting it, and before you know, you're vibrating and you're just like a puddle of goo. So I'm curious for you, and I'd love to hear about, some of the things you mix in with these modalities, because for everyone listening, Shelley isn't just a medicine worker. She also involves integrated family systems, sound healing, and other components to these journeys. And I've been fascinated. I'm really excited to sit with you and do the 5 and parts work combo. And I know for that, you're not usually blasting people off, but
Right.
you know, in your experience, what have you found the utility to be for like 5-MeO? Have there been any big lessons 5-MeO has taught you? And what have you seen working with clients in maybe a more microdosing type aspect? Because I think a lot of people aren't aware that you can microdose things like 5-MeO. And then as a third part of this question, like what would kind of be the interplay between things like 5 and then IFS and parts work and things like that?
Sure. Those are all great questions. I hope I remember them all. So
I'll do my best to remember them too.
so first off, I may be contrarian on the big 5, blast off, but it's not for everyone. It's definitely, in my opinion, it's like an interrupter. I know a lot of veteran groups will use it, for someone that's in deep agony and suicidal. It'll interrupt the pattern because it's just jolting you out. I think for someone that's not in that state, it's better to kind of be more experienced than some of the other compounds before seeking that out. And it can be a really beautiful experience for many people, have this blissful, unity with creator and, feel it removes the fear of death. And it kind of gets you really to that non-dual state very quickly. But it's not really necessary all the time, So I think a lot of people are kind of chasing it sometimes, where it's like, let's slow it down. Kind of what we were just saying is also slow it down in the medicine, And so what I have found to be really therapeutic is coupling a very low dose of 5 with IFS, internal family systems, and helping people get in touch with the parts that are actually causing some of their need for healing, right? We have the different protector parts that are just have good motives, right? They want to keep us safe. They want to keep us in a place where we're not going to get hurt anymore. So they're acting on our behalf, but don't realize that in so doing, we're not living our best life. And so we need to go and do some of these light medicine experiences so we can consciously find these parts and work with them and talk to them. And because a lot of times what I found is IFS is super helpful for many people right out of the gate. And very often I'm only doing IFS in my integration sessions with people. But some people can't get there as deeply without the medicine. And so just a little light dose, and where you're working with the person, you're talking and interacting, they have full agency to know if they want to go a little deeper, if they want to back out a little bit. And it becomes this beautiful dance of working with medicine, with parts, and really seeing deeply some of these memories that people might have suppressed since childhood. It also helps kind of dig into those deeper spots that we can't always remember. So I'm a big fan of low dose 5. Now that's different from microdosing. I wouldn't recommend 5 for microdosing as it stands, like where it's like a, 1 day on, 3 days off kind of thing, not a protocol. It's a low dose in a session. And that's really where I see beautiful work being done. And it's magical to see someone have this in just, a couple hour session, have these breakthroughs that didn't come from ibogaine, didn't come from ayahuasca, didn't come from psilocybin. It came from this like 2-hour session of just someone, holding space, listening, asking the right questions, and just being there to witness, their healing. It's so beautiful. So really, really appreciate the low dose experiences for 5.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been my experience too. Like I've had 2 full on blast off experiences with this amazing guy who, is just, I mean, if I could tell the story, it's pretty ridiculous actually. He's the son of DB Cooper. I don't know if you've ever heard of, I told you about this, but DB Cooper, for everyone listening, have you heard of DB Cooper, Shelley?
No, what is that?
It's like a folk tale, right? So basically, when I was a kid, I used to love this movie called Without a Paddle. And it stars Matthew Lillard and Seth something or whatever. And it's basically about these 4 friends who grew up together. They did everything together. And they always wanted to find DB Cooper's lost treasure. DB Cooper was this guy who basically in the early 70s, he got on an airplane and he passed a note to the stewardess letting her know that he had a bomb on board and that he was going to blow up the plane unless he got $250,000. So basically she goes to the pilot and she's like, we got this guy on board who's making a fuss over here. And basically he allows them to land, let all the passengers off. So only the stewardess and the pilots stayed on the plane. And the FBI actually came and delivered the 250 grand in cash. And then the plane took off again. And he jumped out somewhere, like opened the hatch and just jumped out somewhere over Oregon at like 10,000 feet, some crazy shit, right? Never to be heard from again. They found a couple of $100 bills washed up on a shore that matched the serial numbers, but like literally modern mystery. And so he's actually going on Rogan soon to tell the whole story. So I won't get into all the, the juicy bits here, but that's all I had ever known about when this movie, right? I watched it hundreds of times. I loved this movie. I was always fascinated with D.B. Cooper and his treasure. And I remember as a kid being like, man, I'd love to find that treasure and figure out what happened to him. Well, imagine my surprise when I'm about to get blasted off on 5-MeO DMT and me and this guy are talking. And my buddy Mark is like, hey, did you tell him who your dad was? And he's like, oh, you ever heard of D.B. Cooper? And I'm like, yeah, D.B. Cooper. I'm like, yeah. Oh my God. Like, how do you know about that? Not many people know about it. He's like, well, he was my dad. And I'm like, holy shit. So I'm like, all right, after I come back from this journey, you've got to tell me the story. He's like, all right. So that was like one of those moments, Shelley, where my 13-year-old self and my 30-year-old self both high-fived. It was like, all right, this is where I parked my car, But those two experiences were really powerful. When it happened, he was working with this woman who had this amazing crystal sound bowl. And so as soon as they had this pen system, it was like 6 different pens. So they had pen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what you would do is you'd take a 5-second pull on pen 1. Right. You'd feel like nothing. And then after like a minute, he'd be like, do you want to do another hit? And you'd say yes. And then you'd do a 10-second pull on pen 1. Then if you wanted to go up, you'd do a 5-second pull on pen 2, then a 10-second pull, then go up to pen 3. And that's how you did it. So you could kind of like tiptoe your way in and say at what point, like, nah, I'm good. So basically I went to pen 4 and did a 10-second hit. That was the only pens he had at that ceremony. And it was a full-on whiteout experience, like very intense. And as soon as I started to turn into a puddle of goo, she put the entire sound bowl on my chest and started singing it. And all I remember is coming out of that being like, thank God that she had that sound bowl there. It doesn't make any sense to me, like logically when I say it, but I just know that sound was what took me to wherever I was going and also what led me back. And I have no idea how I would have got back without that. But, it was interesting because the first time I had ever met this guy, he had brought like a pen number 2 to a get together we were at. And we had heard whispers that this guy, Bob, was going to show up. Bob is his mentor. He actually lives out in San Diego. He works with veterans. Yeah. You know, Bob. I forgot we talked about him. So Bob's like a gentle giant. Amazing. He like literally looked into Rachel's eyes and she started crying. He's just like an amazing guy. And so they had the pen 2 there. And I had already been on LSD for about, 7 hours at that point. So he was like, do you want to try it? And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to blast off. He's like, no. This is like a very low dose. I was like, okay. So I did it. And it really just felt like when you're on LSD and you do breath work, like that immense feeling of expansion, it felt like that. So that was only my low dose experience, but I loved it. I was like, oh my goodness, if I had one of these pens, I'd probably do this once a week and just meditate because it gets you right there. Right. It's really amazing stuff, but I realize, 5-MeO is that thing that a lot of people are wanting to get into and they haven't really done it yet, or they're curious about it. So I loved having you on because I was like, I know what I'm going to ask you right off the bat about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a powerful modality and we're seeing so much help again with people with PTSD and trauma and depression, just work through deep, deep memories that they had suppressed. And so it's one of my favorite modalities and it's so simple, it's like, you don't have to, go for days somewhere. It's just a very, very easy experience to go through in the sense of, access, you're not gone for days essentially, Yeah.
What do they, I used to have a buddy who would do NN-DMT. He was a very high level lawyer in the cannabis world. And this is when cannabis was really getting big here in Boston. So he was like ridiculously busy at one of the biggest law firms. He was a partner there and he called it the businessman's trip because he's like, dude, I can get home from work, go down in the basement, blast off and be back at dinner in 15 minutes. And I'm like, my friend, are a different breed of human. I don't know how you're doing that, but that's apparently why a lot of people like it, and it is practical in that sense. That's what I love about cannabis too. For a lot of people that have a lot of obligations and a fast moving life, they don't need to go to a jungle. They can still benefit without having to do that. But, one of my questions for you that I'm really curious on, considering you do so much ceremonial work with yourself and clients as well, I know a lot of people listen to the show to get tips, right? Of like how they can, have the best experiences possible. In your experience, working with hundreds of people and also utilizing these medicines in your own journey, what are some of the most important things you found to be able to have a safe experience? I was going to say positive, but at the same time, like experiences can be challenging and still positive. So I guess if for whoever was listening, if you want to think about it that way, we'd say positive, but overall a safe experience, one that someone's going to come out being able to see something happening for them rather than to them. What are some of the first things that come to your mind or heart in terms of things that someone could walk away from this episode with and go, okay, I'm going to put those things into practice. If I use discernment and know psychedelics are good for me, I'm going to put these into practice to have higher level experiences.
Yeah. I think people that are really experienced, they figured out for themselves what works best because you've had all these experiences that kind of show you. But for a lot of people, I'll tell a story about a client. He was introduced to, everyone knew about psychedelics, right? But he had a friend that, had been really helped with psychedelics, but hadn't been trained as a facilitator. But she was like, hey, come on over and we'll drop some LSD. And he had a lot of anxiety, a lot of trouble. And so he decided he was, okay, I'll go over there. He and his wife went over and they had this experience. And her intention was really good to share some of the healing that she had received from these medicines. But then, the way she did this for this person's first time experience, with just regular music playing and just sitting there talking. There was no sense of taking the time away as a ceremony for this person to really dive deep into what he needed to for his experience. And it kind of actually dysregulated him. And so it kind of gave him a bad taste of like, this didn't really help. As a matter of fact, I kind of felt really anxious from it because when there isn't a guardian in place or a guide, you have, talk about IFS practicing, you will have parts that show up that have to stand guard. So you're not actually dropping all the way in because you have parts that are activated like this isn't safe, this doesn't feel good. And so what I would say is for people that are non experienced, don't just go to a friend's house if you can avoid it. There are probably wonderful people that know how to hold space as friends and it's great. But I would say be careful because it can actually dysregulate you and make you feel kind of more anxious because you couldn't fully sink in. So I would say really explore, your first few times being in ceremony with an experienced facilitator, an experienced guide where you can fully drop in, you'll be safe, you'll be held. And then you can, weave in some of these other experiences, which can be really fun and awesome when you're with your friends and journeying. Yeah. But I think for the first few times, it's just good to know you're held in the space and then explore from there.
Yeah. That is very sound and sage advice. I've had a lot of different psychedelic experiences and some have been very weird, especially like, before psychedelics or what they were now when we were just taking acid and, hanging out or whatever. Right. I'd witnessed this in people. I remember I did a mushroom trip with 3 of my friends and 2 of the friends I didn't know that well. I knew them from the club scene and whatnot. We'd go out and party a lot. Sure. And so we ate, a few grams of mushrooms together. And I remember, this one individual, him and his girlfriend started going through something, when we were all hanging out. And I could tell they didn't, feel comfortable enough, nor did we really feel comfortable enough at that time to be able to support them in that way. I had no idea about this kind of stuff. We were just doing it for quote unquote fun, right?
Right.
And so he went through something and he was like, hey, do you have any MDMA here? Like, we should take some MDMA. And I was like, oh, I'm okay. I don't really want to take MDMA. And he was like, all right, well, we're going to go home. And I was like, you're in like peak level experience. And so I didn't really know what to do about that, but I ended up getting an Uber and just going home. And I talked to him later on and he was like, yeah, a lot of anxiety popped up and a lot of stuff that I didn't know how to handle at the time. And, that was a very big eye opener for me because up until that point, psychedelics were just fun for me. We would take them and put on Spangle or some kind of kaleidoscope and we really had no idea what we were messing with, we'd have these wild experiences where sometimes we would just giggle at movies for hours. And then sometimes we would just be out of our body for hours and all come back at the same time, look at each other like we were strangers and then go back into the experience. And then after we'd just be like, what the hell was that just happened? Right. So like,
Yeah.
again, like I imagine what people can take from this, from what you're saying, what I'm saying is the idea of, we've done a lot of trial by fire, right? And,
Mhm.
I think a lot of the reason that we're in the roles we're in now is to make sure that no one has to make the same potential mistakes. I'm careful to use that term, but, same
Right.
errors that we made, because again, we came out of it okay, but there are real concerns to have when connecting with these medicines, if you're not in a good frame of mind, if you don't have the right setting, things like that. It's not that, it's going to be objectively a bad experience, because there is no such thing as a bad experience just overall. But the amount of challenge that you might face will go up exponentially depending on what you're going through. And so just be aware of that, be aware that, if you feel really good, great. But you could also have a lot of stuff brought up that doesn't feel that good.
Mhm.
And if you feel really damaged, great. But also you could feel really good in that experience. So it's ultimately discernment that's going to get you there. But I'm curious for you, Shelley. I love asking this on episodes, like, because these experiences, like, I think a lot of people, especially people who listen to this show, they're tiptoeing in, I mean, I have a lot of seasoned users too, but, like a lot of people are not really sure what is possible within a psychedelic experience. So I love asking my guests that come on, like, is there one story that sticks out to you, or one experience that sticks out to you personally that you could share with the listeners with regards to something magical, something synchronistic that doesn't even make logical sense, something that happened that really shifted your whole reality? Is there one experience that maybe sticks out to you?
Well, just coming back from ayahuasca, I really would love to talk about that, but
Yeah,
I'm not going to. It's
that's
so really,
next time.
it's just
Yeah.
it was such a beautiful experience that I'm still like just in that glow. But next time
Yeah,
I'll talk
yeah.
about that one.
Part two.
But really, I think what stands out is this year's New Year's journey. As I said, my husband and I do an LSD experience every January 1st, and it's kind of meant as a reset. It's meant to be a moment of creativity, of just joining together in bliss and planning and figuring out like what's next. How can we best help other people? And so this particular experience, I wanted to go a little deeper. So I took higher than a normal dose because I really wanted to be in this experience. And so as I thought I was going to go into this beautiful, blissful experience, it was life school. And I was like, oh, here we go. And what the medicine ended up showing me was it actually felt very much like an ayahuasca experience, because the medicine started showing me all the little ways that I make excuses, and how it kind of showed me in this sludge that was like going through my body. Like every time you tell a little lie or every time you make an excuse, like more of this sludge builds up until all of a sudden you're just stuck.
Hmm.
And it was showing me all the ways that I had been doing that. And it's like, it's so interesting because, especially when you're in this work and you think, oh, I'm always working on myself. I'm always evaluating. I'm always trying to be better. And even then it was like, oh my God, it was just being shown the reality of some of the areas where I made excuses. And it was really beautiful, to be taken to task and to be open to that and to see. It was really and truly life-changing for me, because it brought me back to my knees of like, you know what? There's no like, I've got this, there's no one walking around like, I'm enlightened. That's it. I'm good. It's like, we're all just walking each other home. And so it's so wonderful as a provider to realize that, I'm just here walking next to you. I'm in no way ahead of anybody or better or enlightened. I'm just here trying to figure it out like you are. And so that's really one of the most beautiful experiences I had in medicine. And it was just this year.
Wow. It's amazing too, because I would say undoubtedly my most powerful experiences have been the ones that have humbled me as well, and shown me maybe the errors in my ways, or maybe to say that differently, like the ways in which I could be closer to my higher self, closer to the version of my best self.
Right.
And, Rachel is also a constant psychedelic experience for me, because she's the most honest person I've ever met. So whenever she says anything, that little voice, it's like, well, maybe she's just lying or whatever, or just upset, can't even come in,
Yeah,
And so like, with her and these medicines combined, that has been exponentially amazing for me. And I imagine your husband helps you out in that way too. It's one of the best things about connecting with psychedelics and partnership is that, when you're both willing to lose your lease on reality for a while and open up to the grandiose of the entire reality we live in, and also the reality that we don't currently live in, but we are a part of, aka being closer to God. I think that kind of starts a psychedelic container, even without the medicine, where you're able to see each other more vulnerably. And I think that's the whole point of a relationship anyway, right? To be able to a committed partnership, and why it's so hard to hold out and to stay in one for so long is because the longer you stay in one, the more courageous you're going to have to be to meet your own, shortcomings, your own distortions, things like that, because it becomes very easy for the other person to see where you get stuck, and so, yeah, for anyone listening, I highly recommend, if you use discernment and if these medicines feel proper and right for you in the situation and you have a partner that's down for it, of course, if you're new to it, seek out a facilitator, someone like Shelley, to help you through it. But at the same time, it can be one of those powerful things ever because, I've always heard a statistic too on, partners that go through a challenging experience together, they kind of deepen their bond in a way. When my dad passed away, the person I was with at that time, I really got bonded to her because, again, she supported me through that, evolution of my life. And I think psychedelics are a way you can consciously choose to create that experience, to create an experience where it deepens that bond and shows you more of who you really are. And so it's so beautiful. And Shelley, this has been amazing. I can't believe we've already gone an hour. This is incredible. I got to have you back on for a part 2. Hopefully we'll get to do it in person, part 2. But I know that you're coming out with an amazing psychedelic facilitator training. So for anyone listening who's been feeling FOMO when Shelley and I have been talking, you can take advantage of all the amazing skills that Shelley has developed over a decade in working with these medicines intimately and all of her trainings and everything like that. I'd love if you could share with people where they can find you and then where they can find out more about the psychedelic facilitator training. I know you just came up with an amazing sound healing course as well. So tell the people where I can send them to connect with you and really tap into all the magic that is Shelley DeMarco.
Wonderful. Yeah. Sagesoul.net is really the best place to start. You can connect with all our socials from there. And on the homepage is information about the facilitator training, the sound healing, and some of the other work that we do also with couples. So we have an amazing couples experience that people love. But yeah, I'm very excited to, share what we've done. And what I love about our focus is you're working. I'm not the only teacher. You have other facilitators, very seasoned on the ground facilitators that you get to mentor with. And so what I love about it, it's not just textbook learning. We have hands-on workshops. You're actually walking with the path with other people that are in this world. And it's really beautiful. So we love working with people and helping people on their path as well. So thanks so much for letting me come on and share a little bit of what I do.
Oh, this is awesome. And I'll blow some steam at you right now. Guys, for anyone listening, one of the challenges I see in the psychedelic space, and I imagine this comes from a very good place of intention, but it is definitely a challenge, is the people that think they can go to a music festival and now teach other people how to utilize psychedelics. The reason that I wanted to have Shelley on so bad, along with her just being a dear friend and being someone that I just really vibe with in the space, is that she's someone who is extremely experienced. She's done all the heavy training. She's done a lot of things other than psychedelics, like integrated family systems, sound healing, all of these things, to be able to now put her over a decade of experience into this program. And this is not something new for her. She's been doing this through retreats and everything else for a long time. But the thing is, some people can't, travel out to a retreat. They have other obligations. And so this is her opportunity to now take it virtual, right? And be able to support people virtually. And, again, she has so many different things, so many different courses, so many different retreats she does. Definitely check out everything she's doing. She is absolutely amazing. And I feel very honored and grateful to have her in my life, to be able to come on the show, share with people, and just charge the absolute hell out of my battery. I love you, Shelley. You're so amazing. And I got one last question for you. I got one last question for you that I ask everyone who comes on the show, and I'd love to ask you it. You up for it?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, cool. So let's say someone listens to this show and they're really excited and interested to check out psychedelic medicines in their own life. What is the one piece of advice you would give to them to allow them to use the proper discernment in choosing whether or not right now is the time for psychedelics?
What a great question. I would say, are you ready to learn? Are you ready to really look inside? Because if there's a resistance there, then I would say back it out and start with IFS and start working with parts, which I would recommend anyway. But I would just say, like, if you're just you have to have an openness and a willingness to learn, I think, to really get the most out of these medicines. So I would just take a look and just really spend some time internally evaluating that before deciding.
Yeah. Once again, very sage advice, which is very on brand for, your website and everything. It has sage in there. So I wanted to throw that pun in there. But Shelley, it's been amazing having you on. To everyone at home, I hope you guys got a lot of value from this show. Make sure to check out the show notes for all the links that Shelley mentioned. And make sure to just continue following her. She's coming up with more stuff almost every single week. It's amazing just how dedicated she is to being able to provide life-changing experiences for her clients with or without psychedelics. So even if you're someone like she was mentioning who maybe is a little scared right now, maybe a little hesitant, reach out to her, get some IFS done, get some sound healing done, maybe some breath work, some other things that can open up similar states without having to change your consciousness in the way that psychedelics do. So wherever you guys are in the world, I hope you are having the best day ever. And as always, may the source be with you. Peace for now.